you aside if you want to hold this. So go ahead. You want to go ahead and get yours set up? I'll read your in. All right, next up we have Caitlin Goodman from Swarthmore College presenting Description and Discovery of Carceral Records. Swarthmore colleges hold a handful of collections that document incarceration, primarily related to Quaker worship groups in prisons. These records are sometimes created by people inside and sometimes by outside members or liaisons, but they are almost always donated by those outside the carceral system. Carceral collections raise serious questions of privacy and power, and equally serious and less pressing questions about subject access and preferred terminology. While Caitlin doesn't have all the answers, she'll share some of the thoughts and decisions around description and is hoping to learn from others with similar consideration.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, so I'm Caitlin Goodman. I'm an archivist at the Friends Historical Library of Swarthmore College, and this morning I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the collections we have that include carceral records. And by that I mean both records created by incarcerated people and records that are about incarcerated people, but created by those outside the prison system. I want to credit Anna Robinson-Sweet's recent article in Archivaria, Caring for Archives of Incarceration, for helping me think through some of the ethical obligations of institutional stewardship, and more foundationally, I want to thank Miriam Kaba for her constant work on liberation in libraries, and also to note that her papers are just upstairs in special collections here. And I'll reiterate what Jessica alluded to in the description. This is going to be a very sort of ruminative kind of talk. I do not have any answers. I do not have any best practices. And I'm hoping to think through some of these things with you. So I'll start with some context about my descriptive ecosystem. So I use the consortial implementation of ArchivesSpace. It's shared across 3 colleges, Bryn Mawr, Haverford, and Swarthmore. They share a lot of library systems. This is one of them. I'm part of a department, the Swarthmore College Special Collections, that includes 4 curatorial units. And I work as an archivist as part of a 4-person full-time team in the Friends Historical Library, or FHL, I'm going to refer to as FHL as we go on, one of those curatorial units where we collect around Quakers and Quakerism. So the application is shared with broad policies set by the Tri-College Consortium, but descriptive decisions are generally left to the curatorial unit, and practices can and do vary widely across our instance of ArchivesSpace. And even within FHL, we have a couple of different kinds of records that need to be handled differently, including personal papers, organizational records, and congregational records of Quaker meetings. So unsurprisingly, some of the personal papers we have are pretty old. I'll use the Mira Sharpless Townsend papers here as my example. She lived in the first half of the 19th century, and she was a Quaker social reformer. So this collection is a newish acquisition for us, but it's old records, and it's of particular interest because of Townsend's work establishing and leading the Rosine Association, which was a woman-led reformist aid group for women entangled in what was then the early carceral state. Primarily, Rosine worked with sex workers and women in addiction. The detailed casebooks maintained by Townsend for the Rosine Association have benefited from a lot of community engagement, and there are some really exciting and really important work that various people, both within the institution and outside of it, have done in making these casebooks meaningful and activated for the current period. But the descriptions in ASpace tend to remain pretty sparse, and both the collection description and the digitized surrogates, which they're in our dams, they're not in ASpace, and the transcriptions don't have the same enhanced attention to content warnings as the projects that have been built on these materials. We also have more contemporary personal papers, both as unprocessed backlog and as open collections. Sometimes our accession record will highlight materials of concern or include a processing plan noting areas that will benefit from extra attention. But generally, these collections were processed in a period when FHL staff were not thinking about the ethical implications of carceral collecting. The Arthur Clarke Prison Reform Papers, for example, is a very small collection, which generally means for us a very brief finding aid. But I think we want to think more programmatically about how the content of the records may require us to be more granular with our description, particularly if a collection includes detail about incarcerated people who may not know information about them is preserved at Swarthmore College. Currently, we do not publish our accession records, and we have very few processed collections with restrictions. Do we need to change either or both of these policies in response to an ethic of archival care? FHL also collects organizational records, which are usually from Quaker groups that may be active in or interested in prison reform, although generally they are not abolitionists. Here's another small collection, although one that does have a more robust finding aid. I think there are probably two immediate concerns here. One is the harmful or euphemistic descriptive language we're using to describe the history and aims of the Quaker Emergency Service and its Civilian Readjustment Committee. So the Civilian Readjustment Committee was a very small diversion unit that referred men arrested in New York City for, quote, degenerate, disorderly conduct to psychiatric treatment instead of prison. It worked with more than 15,000 people during its operational years, and it operated from 1946 to 1951, and arguably it closed in 1951 because its founder was himself arrested for soliciting gay sex. So the other issue is one of our descriptive goals. There were like 34 really fascinating stories here. There's a scholar, Brian Blackmore, who's written a good amount on the Quaker Emergency Service, and particularly the Civilian Readjustment Committee. But as archivists, we have to figure out which ones we're going to point to. So how do we amplify histories that have been historically smothered? The last record group with carceral documents in FHL is records of Quaker congregations themselves. One idiosyncrasy here is that they are not owned by FHL. These particular records are deposited by the Quaker meetings. I'm not going to spend time detailing sort of the administrative hierarchy of Quakerism, but generally these kinds of records come to us from the immediate creating body, that is the congregation itself. A big exception is those of worship groups and other ad hoc smaller bodies that are understood to be, quote, under the care of a larger congregation. So here is an example of a preparative meeting that functioned at Eastern Correctional Facility in New York in the 1990s and 2000s, where the records came to us from the much larger sort of senior administrative body of the New York yearly meeting. The creators of these records were incarcerated men who became members or who regularly attended prison worship services for Quaker meeting. And the records themselves document the bureaucratic struggles the group had within the prison and within the larger body of Quakerism, down to questions of what the group's real name is. So who gets to make the kinds of choices about how we describe these things? And this is an issue particularly as it comes to authority work. So I create name authority records for Quakers and Quaker groups for the Library of Congress's Name Authority Cooperative Program. So in this particular case, I will be creating the name record for Eastern Preparative Meeting. But there are broader discovery issues here. So I think we all probably know that Library of Congress subject headings are deeply imperfect as an epistemological system, and they're sometimes actively harmful. But what do we want to do as a curatorial unit within FHL, or as a body with a consortial ArchivesSpace implementation, or perhaps as a profession about some of the ways in which we group carceral records for discovery? The heading Church Work with Prisoners is the term authorized by the Library of Congress to describe a lot of the prison worship group records we have. But it decenters the inside creators, and I'm not going to use it. So what am I going to use? So here's a bit of a resource dump. There are dedicated SACO funnels, which is the term for Library of Congress subject authority teams, for nearly 30 topical or regional authority questions. That includes things like Judaica, or gender and sexuality, or comics. But other than law, which doesn't seem right here, there is no group working within LC's program for cooperative cataloging on these kinds of authority terms, which include other bad options like ex-convicts. The topical term mass incarceration was only created about 18 months ago, so as you probably expected, LC is not the vanguard here. But I haven't found a community of practice around this narrow slice of reparative description yet, even as there's a lot of meaningful work happening. There's the Abolitionist Library Association, but they focus on divesting for prisons and carceral surveillance within libraries with attention on information access for incarcerated people, and library divestment from prison labor and PIC models of surveillance. There's also activists working in crit-cat circles, and they're thinking deeply about enacting social justice and empathy through new cataloging practices. But carceral subjects don't have their own resource library like some of the more active crit-cat groups. I know there's colleagues in the Texas After Violence Project and the American Prison Writing Archive who are also real experts thinking seriously about this, but there's no best practices. A lot of archivists are still referring users and each other to the Marshall Project article, which is great, but it is also journalism, not archives. So where should we be looking? What should we be creating? So as promised, here are some of my questions and none of my answers. I think we do need to center the wishes of creators, regardless of whether they are donors, and that might require some relationship building work beyond the usual scope of archival processing. I think we do want to amplify these threads in our collections, but I wonder to what extent we are burnishing our brand when we should be practicing archival care. I think we need to figure out how we can reconcile the capacity concerns of a privacy audit with the access imperatives of an archives with the ethic of care for the things we have. And that might mean there are some things we have that we shouldn't. So if anyone feels animated to think through these questions with me, please do reach out and we can stumble our way to a more ethical approach together. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Those are very good questions. Does anyone have answers? No, I'm just kidding. Does anyone have any questions for Caitlin or anything that they would like to add? That was really great.
When you're dealing with a specific collection, are you going to take a portion of that collection maybe and restrict it, or would you restrict the entire? And what would be the criteria?
Those are great questions. My answer is it depends, right? I mean,
An archivist answer.
Yeah, exactly. We all feel really animated by access, right? Like that's why we're doing the work that we do. We want people to access the stuff. But do we have, traditionally restrictions might come from donors. Those aren't going to be at play here. So we might have to come up with a new criteria for what we're going to do. So an easy answer is like, 50 years from date of creation for anything with personal identifying information. Is that what we want to commit to? We'll see.
I have kind of a selfish question. So I work with a local group that connects people who are in prison with books. In your research, have you come across any groups like that doing archiving of their work? We haven't really started to think about that yet. I know there's several groups like that.
That's a great question. I don't know. Have you talked to anyone at ABLA? The Abolitionist Library Association? Yeah. I couldn't speak to that. I have a colleague who might be able to speak to that. But
Exchange information. All right, Dan, and then that'll be the last one.
Hi, Dan Michelson, Smith College. Sort of a comment, I guess more than a hard. Anyway, one of the issues I think that with this is scalability. When you start opening up the question of beyond what is restricted by law or by donor agreement or whatever, you start having can come up with criteria. How do you apply it? At a scalable level. And I know at Smith we also want incarceration and activism around that, and that is actually we haven't say we've got much work you have on it, but I think our what I understand our approach has been by
you, Caitlin. You asked really good questions. I would love to hear follow-up in the future from you, so thank you so much.